Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us at Dr. Kelly Kent's virtual town hall, Reimagining the Future of Our Schools. My name is Megan Sally Wells. I am on the Culver City Council. I'm a former mayor and mom of two CCUSD kids, one of whom just graduated from Culver High in these unprecedented times. I'm really pleased that our Culver City Unified School Board member, Dr. Kelly Kent, is here with us today to address the many critical issues facing our children and our entire school community. We're going to start off with an interview led by Maximina Jusson, followed by a Q&A. You can send in your questions by emailing kenttownhall2020@gmail.com. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Maximina Jusson, who's been a parent in the district for the past 14 days. She currently has one child at El Marino, where she served on the PTA board and is co-president of ALEM. ALEM is El Marino's booster club for target language support. Maximina is also the publisher of Culver City Catalyst, which is a community online publication supporting progressive ideas for tomorrow's Culver City. Thank you so much for doing this, Maximina, and take it away.
Thank you, Megan. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm very honored to introduce Kelly Kent. Many of you know her well from having already served one term on the Board of Education of Culver City. Today, she is officially launching her bid for a second term, serving on the board. Kelly is known for her fierce advocacy for children and families in Culver City, especially as it relates to equity and inclusion, sustainability, and improving outcomes for all students in CCUSD. In her first term, she has participated in passing a range of equity initiatives along with her colleagues. And her most notable fiscal achievement was the successful campaign to pass Measure K. This initiative secured $2.3 million in annual revenue and catapulted CCUSD out of a severe deficit. So today, I'm excited to hear Kelly's vision for her second term, and I'm sure everyone attending will be listening with keen ears, especially during this historically challenging and unprecedented time. I think we can all agree that our education leadership matters more now than ever before. So with that, let us welcome Kelly Kent. Hello, Kelly.
Hey there, Maximina. How are you?
Nice to see you. So we're going to get right into it. All the parents, that first thing on their mind right now is what schools are going to look like in the fall. So if you can talk about that in the short term as well as the long term, and also what your role will be as everything unfolds.
Yeah, I really appreciate that we're starting that way, because it's we're here to talk about me running for re-election for a second term, but we're not going to start that conversation without recognizing the moment that we're in, and even the day that we're in, which is just the weekend after Governor Newsom told us that most of the state is not going to be able to start with any on-campus learning this fall, right? And that does include us. So we do need to start there, and I appreciate that we're going to do that together. So the short term is that we will be fully remote, and that does mean that all students are learning in the distance model. And so that means that the district's work is to make sure that every student has a device, every student has internet access, that we are assured that this model this fall is going to be very, very different than what we saw in the spring, which was that rapid pivot that none of us were prepared for. But the expectation is that now we have enough time to get fully prepared, and that it's going to look like an actual instructional model where learning can occur, and where we're going to hold the district accountable for that. So specifically, in terms of my role as holding people accountable, I'm going to be on the board, and I need to ask those questions. So how do we ensure that there's parity between sites, across grades? What's our method for tracking engagement, for tracking learning? Are the principals going to be needing to be sure that they're holding their teams to the same standards throughout the site? amongst the sites. All those things are really critical, and we were not able to do that in the spring. Questions about what happens if we determine that students are not engaging, what if they're not learning, what are we going to do then, right? And I specifically need to ask those questions in public and from the dais. I did on Thursday night ask the superintendent and our health director and our assistant superintendent of business services if we are able to support very targeted, intensive intervention on campus at the start of school for the students who need it most. So when I'm talking about these students, I'm talking about the students who have shown evidence of severe learning loss, or they have shown evidence of a mental health crisis, or they really cannot function under the distance learning paradigm, maybe because they either have a disability that interferes with access, or perhaps their first language is not English and no one in the home speaks English. And I was told by that staff that indeed we will be able to accommodate those students in person on campus in the fall, but with all of the safety parameters in place. Okay, so the very first thing is to be sure that we can meet all of the state and county guidelines, of which we are now fully in the loop on. They've sent us to all of them. We finally do have clear guidelines, because we were winging it a little bit up until very recently, up until just about Friday when Newsom came out with his announcement. And so now that we have those parameters, we need to verify that those are being put into place. And so how do we do that? Well, we do that via messaging. So I have to be sure that I am seeing evidence that we are doing everything we can to keep our staff safe. So I want to see constant updates in both text or verbal announcements, but also in images. Show me what classrooms look like, show me what the janitors' schedules are, show me the supplies as they're arriving. I actually did visit OCD, our Office of Child Development, on Thursday morning before that board meeting where we voted to go all remote, and it is totally possible. We can do this. The staff there feel very safe. The children are in groups of 8 to 10. They are in a classroom and also outdoors. They are staying socially distanced. They are wearing their masks the entire time. These are 3- and 4-year-olds. And the staff have all the PPE on. But the work that the district has to do is make sure our K-12 staff trust us first before we go into any sort of model like this at the rest of the districts. So we know it's possible, but now we have to do the job of communicating to everyone that we are able to do this safely. I also need to make sure that I'm hammering the idea of outdoor instruction, right? There's no reason that this shouldn't be the default under these circumstances. Again, with these small targeted high needs groups. So then that means my work is, one, assure we're meeting all the safety precautions and communicating about it, but two, that we're not holding on to our old models of schooling. Because as we re-enter this coming year, the goal is definitely not to return to normal. So, and then to get to the long term, we are returning to a hybrid, we are re-entering under a hybrid model. We haven't fully settled on that yet, but again, first, absolutely safety precautions, absolutely meeting all the health guidelines, including most critically training. Okay, we need to train our staff around these procedures and precautions, again, so that they can trust that this is something that they're willing to do, right? That we, of course, put their lives first, and of course, we value their lives. And so then we can essentially move to a pod model on campus with 10 to 12 students in a cohort for live instruction, again, outdoors as much as possible, especially for elementary. And then my job, make sure we communicate about those safety measures being put in place. I asked the superintendent and the health coordinator to conduct weekly messaging every week on Wednesdays about the progress of those safety measures and logistics around partnership, because we are partnering with the city of Culver City. We have already begun those conversations to figure out how to use shared space. They have grounds and we have grounds, and we're going to figure out how to share that together. And so then, the mission is really for us to tell our story, to get out in front of it. I don't know that we've done a great job before now, but to get out in front of it, tell our story to our community, What is learning going to look like, and why? Why a hybrid model? Why are we making the choices we're making? What are the other 3 days going to look like if we're 2 days on campus and 3 days off, right? And some of that is going to be childcare for some of our families. But if you've been in our aftercare program at CCUSD, you know that it's excellent, and you know that they will be really wonderful at facilitated remote learning. I hope that helped.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think getting ahead of all the various use cases is key as this new reality continues to unfold itself, perhaps in unexpected ways. So AB 77 is a bill that was recently passed in California in light of the pandemic. Can you educate parents on what that is and what the unique opportunities that come along with AB 77, and also how you intend to effectively implement this bill across our district?
Yeah, again, really great question, because it's a very powerful tool. It's super recent. It's really only maybe just now 3 weeks old. And it's an opportunity for us, and by us, I mean this community, all the parents, the board, to really be sure that we are following the steps that the district is taking and making, and that we are asking all the right questions, and that we are holding them accountable. We're on the same team, but at the same time, we're part of that team, and so we need to be involved. I really want parents to understand this bill. I really invite them to go check it out. It's written in understandable language. I think there's a Wikipedia page for it, but just to break down some of it. So it does actually mandate in-person daily interaction. Okay, so that means there is going to be some in-person interaction every single day, and that we need to quantify that, track it, measure it, report out on it. It also mandates 4 hours of daily instruction. Okay, so that instruction is not all necessarily synchronous. In other words, it's not all necessarily you and I are face-to-face right now, Maximina. That would be synchronous. So some of that 4 hours is going to be asynchronous and will be implied time through an assignment that a student is doing on their own time or offline or through some other means. But that is a regulated number of minutes. And then there's also a mandated component regarding professional development, which is really critical. It also mandates dollars that are tied to our special education population. In fact, there are $625 per student specifically that we have to be sure we're asking where those dollars are being spent and how are they being spent to meet the needs of our students with disabilities. We have dollars attached to our English learners. There are mandates around quantifiable engagement. Okay, so that's really important. How do we know our students are engaging? What is that measurement? If we say they're engaging, what do we mean by that? Also, what are we doing if we see evidence of learning loss? We have to show that we're tracking and that we're going to intervene if we see it. We also have a really great mandate of stakeholder engagement. And so that's you and me, right? We're the stakeholders. The community is the stakeholders. And so that hasn't been a real strength of the district in the past. We've been good with engaging some stakeholders and not all. So I'm really looking forward to this. I feel very empowered by this bill as an opportunity to make sure that we are engaging all stakeholders. And in particular, it asks that we regularly communicate with parents about academic progress. So that's very specific, right? That means people should expect to hear from their teachers specifically about their students' academic progress. That's a big deal. So I, as a board member, have asked for reports on all of this. How are we going to measure it? How are we going to monitor these things? I've asked for those reports from both our Ed Services Department and our Business Services Department.
Great. So obviously reporting is going to be really key here, because if we need to course correct and draw some actionable insight, we're going to need that reporting. So can you talk a little bit more about the methodology for that reporting and how you're going to ensure that that's going to be accurate?
Yeah, because, like report, schmaport, you know what I mean? Like what, that may not mean much to regular folks, and also how accurate. I mean, there's all sorts of questions. But again, AB 77 is where the power is, and so I'm really excited about that. Specifically, we're going to be completing a continuity plan, which is a distance learning plan. But also super cool is that it mandates that we have to have a stakeholder-friendly budget. Okay, so that's a big deal because that means that we have to make it intelligible for our community to know how, why, where we're spending all of our dollars, and specifically these dollars tied to the COVID-19 response, right? So we have to make a document that our community can understand, and that I, as a board member, have to say, I need to know dollar for dollar. What are we doing to mitigate learning loss? What are we doing to mitigate mental harm? Okay, because that did occur. We have had more suicidality this spring and summer as a result of social isolation. These are very urgent problems. What are we doing about them, and how are we spending money to support those needs? And then also, what about the emotional support our staff need? How are we providing what we call tier 1 support, emotional and social support for the adults who really matter on campus? Our educators are hurting too. What are we doing to provide across the board mental health supports for them? And again, it's on the board to confirm that what is reported in that continuity plan, which is going to go up to Sacramento, is what is actually happening on the ground. So how do we do that, right? How do I ensure that we're not just telling Sacramento that we're doing something? That's why I put together a budget committee with my colleague, Dr. McKeithen, to hear directly from staff. What is working? What isn't working in this moment of crisis? Where is more support from the district needed? And where are we underutilizing resources? And where can we redirect? So we're actively doing that work.
Thank you for providing that insight. So equity and inclusion is a really big part of your platform. But can you talk about how the pandemic impact, your plans for your platform pre-pandemic?
Yeah, it's a lot shifted. I had some priorities that I really wanted to talk about this time around, and they're still on my horizon, but they've been knocked down a few notches on the totem pole, and really appropriately so. But absolutely, equity and inclusion are my issues, and they have been for all 5 years on my first term. And right now, a lot has been exposed. We have an opportunity to remake curriculum, to remake our hiring process, our retainment of staff, to actually authentically start the process through the lens of equity from the beginning, instead of after we realize we've created harm. So right now, I want us to start by bringing students to the table. I care very much about student voice and authentic community engagement. As I said, we need to get stronger in the stakeholder engagement area, bringing all families to the table, not just those who've been historically empowered, but then really critically bringing our educators to the table, asking them questions about what do we believe graduation requirements should be? What do we believe building a culture of inclusion looks like? How do we make sure there's parity from site to site, and that every single sixth grader is equally prepared to excel at the middle school? Right? I mean, my expertise is neuroscience. And so I can tell you, with authority, that for the brain to learn best, it needs 3 things. It needs to feel safe, interpret, feel loved, to feel challenged, to care about the content. Okay? So that means our mandates are relationships, rigor, and relevancy, and in particular, cultural relevancy. So I refuse to look back on this moment and see that we didn't put all of that into place when we had the chance.
So obviously students are an important component, but the other really important component to all of this are teachers. Mm-hmm. So you talked about professional development, you talked about training. Can you go a little bit more into that? Because obviously in this new paradigm, teachers are really having to pivot, how they've taught essentially their entire careers. So now that we're going into virtual learning, how does that tie into the professional development, recruiting new talent, and also maybe this AB 77 bill?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a real critical piece. So another aspect to these changes up in Sacramento have been that we actually do have 3 different pools of money from the state that are related to this particular question, that have been apportioned to mitigate learning loss, right? So one pool is specifically for our students with disabilities, for our special education work. Another pool, the second pool, is for our foster students, homeless students, low socioeconomic student status, and our English learner students. And yet a third, an entirely different pool, is for all students. But some of those dollars, as I said earlier, are directly tied to professional development, right? So again, I need to follow those dollars. I need to continue to use my budget committee and other methods to be sure that that implementation is taking place the way that we are saying it is on the documents that we're sending up to the state, right? So that's part of it. But there's another piece that's really important, and maybe unique to Culver City, which is that we need to confront a current reality that CCUSD does not have complete buy-in on all of our commitments in terms of our values and in terms of our signature practices, or what are the most progressive teaching methods, the latest in how to teach best. And we have to ask ourselves why that is. What's missing in our district that prevents us from insisting that every educator, for instance, get trained in universal design for learning? That's the acronym for that is UDL, and it's a pedagogical method, a method for teaching that benefits all students, but is really the best evidence-based practice in terms of including all special education students into the general education environment. And so when I ask why we don't have complete buy-in and why we aren't able to insist that training is through all K-12, I think that it's on us. We haven't done a great job of involving our staff in our decision-making in order to get that buy-in so that we aren't facing resistance when we need to get to the training part. So the question is, how am I, as part of the board, going to hold the administration accountable for spending the professional dollars, but also how am I going to ensure that the educators get trained and supported in the latest on remote instruction, the latest on anti-bias, the latest on inclusion? And I have to ask those questions, and it can be uncomfortable, but I have to ask those HR questions in public at every meeting, from recruitment to retainment. What culture are we building? What culture do we expect every new staff member to buy into? And how are we authentically inviting those experts, the teachers? They know what they're doing. How are we inviting them into the decision-making space? But also making it clear that there are and there should be non-negotiables here in this district. We do have a really important tool, an underutilized means to do this, in something called our partnership. It's our labor management partnership. And so that's something I do plan to make much more use of in my second term, to both get that buy-in on those board adopted values, but also get the commitment in terms of the district-wide practices and trainings.
Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be really important that we're doing everything we can to position our teachers to succeed. So it's really good to hear some really robust thought that's going into that. So we're about to prep for some audience questions. So momentarily, we're going to hand things over to Megan while we do that.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Maximina. As a parent, that was just fascinating and really important for us to be getting this type of information right now. To me, it's abundantly clear that we need Dr. Kent's continued experience, her expertise, her data-informed decision-making, her heart, her moral compass, and definitely her leadership on the Culver City School Board in this moment. And just as this is a time of extraordinary challenges for our community and for our children's education, let's face it, it's also going to be a very different election year. This is an unprecedented, socially distant campaign. It's also the first time the school board election is happening at the same time as the general election, the city council election, and the presidential election. So there's going to be tremendous turnout and very limited ways to connect directly with voters in person. So this means that the campaign is going to need to send out more mailers to more people than ever, and that takes money. That takes money. I know that Kelly has always enjoyed great grassroots support, and I expect no less in this election. Please step up. Please join me in supporting Kelly's reelection campaign. You can donate right now at kellykent.com. kellykent.com. We need our children, our whole community needs her leadership in this moment. So please step up and do your part at kellykent.com and give the donation that you can today and going forward into the future as well. I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, we've got some really great questions in from the audience. The first one is, what should CCUSD do about students who do not have the resources to participate in distance learning?
Yes, we do have students who do not have the resources that they need, and it is absolutely our obligation to provide them access to the best instruction possible. So the first thing is, in the immediate, every student has to have a device and every student has to have internet, and we got to do whatever it takes to get them that. And so we are providing hotspots that are going to their homes. And of course, they're getting access to the Chromebooks. But there's a longer term way to look at this too, because that solution is actually not ideal, because sometimes the hotspots lead to, intermittent internet access, or there are things interfering with the ability to really function in a quiet space at home or whatever. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that we can provide a safe, healthy, protected means for those students to be on campus. And so we need to put in place all of the protocols, all the precautions, check off every single box when it comes to the county health guidelines. And then we need to invite them into the space, and we need to, provide some supervision. And that's on us, and we've got to figure that out. And that's part of that targeted high need intervention work that has to happen day one, and that is going to happen on campus, and that we are going to assure is going to happen safely. That's the only way to do it equitably, to provide access to all of our students.
Thank you, Kelly. So the next question is, what should the district be doing to correct the unofficial segregation in the district that so many students mentioned during the recent protests?
Yes, I heard those comments too. Our CCHS students were incredible. Our CCHS alum were incredible at the Black Lives Matter protests. And I have to say first, I'm really moved by the leadership and the voice that our students are demonstrating. And yeah, they talk about something that's real, that we do, have schools that are either primarily, homogenous of one sort or another, right? So we have a school that's considered a brown school, or a school that's considered a white school, and so on and so forth. And why are we okay with that? And we also have students who report that their experience is that when they get to the middle and the high school, the educators sometimes indicate that they have expectations based on which elementary school they came from, right? So that de facto segregation is happening at the elementary school level. And we are totally in a position to do something about it. In fact, this is the nature of, structural violence. This is the nature of institutionalized racism. And so we have to do something about it. We have to look at it. We have to have a conversation. We have to invite in the community. We do have a great opportunity to do that right now through our equity strategic planning work. And so as part of that, we are going to recommend that we look at board policies. And so one of those board policies absolutely has to be our permitting policy, and thinking about how we are designating policies to folks who live within Culver City, but also folks who live outside of Culver City. And then also, maybe we can talk about other ideas. Maybe zoning is a way to look at this question. I think there are lots of innovative ways to get at it, but let me just say, ignoring it is not something I'm going to put up with. We have to have the conversation. We have to look at it from the board's perspective. What power do we hold?
I've seen you at the recent BLM protests organized by the students. I know that you're very close to what they're feeling. Mm-hmm. Next question is, after COVID-19, what health safety precautions should CCUSD take to be prepared for the next pandemic?
Oh, this is our new reality. Yeah, I mean, the lesson is to be prepared, to not let this take us by surprise next time. And so I do think that the same way that school districts have to be prepared for earthquakes and as depressing as it is, be prepared for shootings, we need to be prepared for health crises like these. And so all of these lessons learned are going to enable us to have all of the supplies on hand that we're going to need to, roll out the next time this happens. And the good news is from practicing with these various models of both remote but also hybrid, that means that we will be able to do that again when that time comes, following all of the recommendations from the state and the county, as we have done in this instance. But let's not be unprepared ever again, please.
If one lesson is to be learned, that would be it. We as parents, sometimes feel left out. What should the district do to include parents more?
Yeah. So this is something I care a lot about. I went down to visit Anaheim Unified School District, and they're well known. They got this reputation for doing some really incredible stakeholder engagement with all their parents, and not just the parents, who tend to be, very vocal and advocate for their kids quite a bit at the level of the site or the district, everybody. And so when I went and toured, I went and actually hung out with the superintendent. It felt super special. And he, gave me an idea of the work that they're doing, and they're doing it. And so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We do need to communicate with other districts who are doing this successfully. This was pre-COVID, but there's nothing that prevents us from using these methods and translating them into our current situation. And he would do these cool things where he would, take families on grand rounds through the classrooms where they actually see the instructional practices that are happening with their kids as they're happening, which is super important because it gets buy-in from the community. Sometimes communities push back on some of the practices we adopt. That happened a lot with Common Core and some of the math methods we were using. So how do we create buy-in? That's one way, right? Bring them in and show them the learning, show them the aha moments and the inspiration in the babies, right, as it's happening. But it's a twofold method, because the other thing that happens when you do that is you get that, like, we're all in this together, staff included, right? Because you're going to go into staff's rooms, you're going to, meet all of the educators on the campus as part of this work. You're going to have to get their consent as you do it in the first place. And so then everybody's bought in, and it's all a full team approach. And so anyway, that may or may not be the prescription for us, but we do know that there are ways to do it. We can feed families more, we can make sure that we're getting the messaging out, not just via one platform, but many. I mean, there are lots of things that I really would like us to do better. And I do plan to make that a real commitment in the next term.
Thank you, Kelly. So this is a really good question. What should the district do in terms of the curriculum to make sure all the students are prepared for life after high school?
There are some really great answers there. Some things that I think we need to work on right away. Some of it we are talking about currently through our equity strategic planning, but some districts have made graduation requirements changes, and I would like us to do some of this in our own district. So in California, there are a set of eligibility criteria you have to be eligible for the four-year universities, for the CSUs or for the UCs, and they're called A through G completion requirements. It's just a series of courses that cover some core content that are considered required to be eligible for four-year university. And we don't require A through G completion for all of our graduates. And so even though we have a wonderful graduation rate, we don't have as excellent of a rate of students who are going to four-year university, or at least eligible, because of course it's going to be about their choice. But the very least we can do is leave students better prepared after high school than they entered when they were going into ninth grade, right? We can't start taking away options for them. So if we're not giving them eligibility to a four-year in California, then we have de facto taking away some options. So I'm really hoping that we can look at, in fact, I'm going to fight to look at making A through G requirements a graduation requirement. And then there are lots of other things to do along those lines. But again, I want to do it with a team. I want student voice in that room. I want teacher voice in that room. I want community voice in that room. I want parents of folks who have not previously been invited to the table in that room to help us decide what we care about our students graduating with. Is ethnic studies a requirement? I think that's a real hot topic. The state is looking at that. Why aren't we doing it before they tell us we have to? What about gender studies? What about intercultural literature, et cetera? So I think we got to look at graduation requirements because I think we can do better at preparing our students for when they leave.
Okay, last question from the audience. How are we going to keep extracurricular activities and sports post-COVID when there's a budget crunch? So I haven't heard a lot of talk around sports, right? Obviously, that's a really big component of student life and student mental health. So it'd be great to hear what you think along those lines.
But the question is logistics and fiscal. I mean, I'll try to address both briefly. The logistics in terms of the safety are that, athletics in this academic year are going to look different. And, a part of me breaks acknowledging that my daughter is an avid basketball player. And so I do not know what indoor basketball is going to look like this year. I really don't. And I don't think that any institutions have fully figured that out yet. There are going to be some athletics that are going to be doable because they are naturally socially distanced, right? And so those will continue to take place where feasible and where appropriate, but we are going to have a radical shift in what our athletics look like. And even our physical education is taking a completely different tenor when it does start happening on campus. It's of course going to be separated by 6 feet at all times. And the little kids do that with pool noodles, which is super sweet. Fiscally speaking, I don't know if I have a full picture of that yet. We are going into some very serious budget cuts. And so I think this is going to be the time where more than ever, we ask for support from our community and we start really knocking on the doors of our partners. Who are the corporate partners and who can we really implore, because you know what, their kids go to our schools too. So I think this is that moment.
I love all the thinking and the passion that you're putting into everything and how you answered all the questions. So last question to leave everyone with who's taken the time to come today. Why Kelly? Why now?
Yeah, that's why we're here. And I am running again because I love it. It's hard. It's hard. It's been hard, and it's been hard in more ways than just the work on the dais. It's also it's been emotionally challenging as well. But I also know that I've been able to make an impact, and I want to continue to do that. And I am the right person to do that work right now because equity has to be the lens, especially now. Especially regarding the unintentional harms. We live in one of these communities where everybody says and believes, that they want to do right by all students, including students of color and, and previously underserved populations. But we're talking about impact, not intent, right? And so sometimes the impact is harmful, even though the intention is not harmful. And so we got to look at that unintentional harm. And I have really shown, I've put my commitment to that value. I've put my commitment to that value forward for these past 5 years. And so I've now got that experience under my belt, and I've got a real understanding of how to use my power on the dais. And then there's the moment, right? This moment, this once in a lifetime, perhaps multiple lifetimes moment. And I'm ready to hit that value hard right out of the gate. And even harder than I did before, because I see the role that the institutions and the structures play in the injustice that they have perpetuated for decades. So it's the equity piece, it's that commitment, but I do want to end with, I do have another particular experience set that really matters besides the track record, which is that I have the lens that comes from my neuroscience background. And, so it leads me to be able to fight for innovation and advocate for innovation in this moment. And just to bring it all back to a really brain-based principle, which is that relationships are first. The brain has no ability to take in and retain in an environment that does not feel supportive. It just doesn't. And so relationships are the only way we're going to get these students to be engaged under this new and very foreign paradigm. So the superintendent has committed to spending the first week of school solely on social and emotional wellness. And I think that's a really excellent start. And I am going to hold us to that. And I am going to consistently underscore that love of every single student has got to lead us in this work so that we can inspire every child to reach for and achieve their greatest potential.
Thank you, Kelly. We're going to pass it back over to Megan. We'll close it out today.
All right. Well, that was super inspiring. And Kelly, I just want to thank you for the leadership that you've had on the board, the brain power, the experience, the heart that you're bringing, and the tremendous work that you've done. You really met the moment, and I have just complete confidence in your leadership. So thank you for answering these questions. Thank you, Maximina, for your great questions. And of course, to all those who joined us this evening, thank you for giving us your time and your excellent questions. Please remember, you can still donate at Kelly's campaign. You can sign up to endorse her. You can volunteer for her campaign. It's kellykent.com. kellykent.com, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. Be safe.
Thanks all.
Bye. Thank you.